Thank you for joining this session. Today, we're going to be talking about performance and how to basically use different um, performance tools to identify issues in your world and what to do to address the most common issues as well. My name is Pigeon number 12. I am a mentor for the MHCP, and I specialize in scripting and optimization. This session is going to be, it covers two areas of the skills matrix. That is scripting and art. Uh, Normally, performance is conducted after the world is created. It's good to have performance knowledge before or during the creation of the world, but normally performance assessment and optimizations are conducted out at the end. That's why performance always involves both areas, scripting and art, because depending on what we find, we might either address the scripting side or we might address the art side of things. A little bit of housekeeping here. During this session, we have these rules over here. This session is being recorded. This so we can share this content for those that cannot make it to this session. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. I'm going to try to do my best to keep an eye on the audience. But by all means, if you raise your hand and I don't call you, please feel free to speak up, and I'll make sure to address you. Mute yourself if you're not talking, just to make sure that we don't have any background noises. Keep the conversation going in the chat. Questions have designated times. I'm going to try to pause during the presentation to make sure that I address the questions. Be active. Use the chat for any technical issues. And at the end of the session, make sure to fill the feedback survey to make sure that we get the information from you and to know if this type of content is useful or not. Okay, so as part of the preparation of this session, I went ahead and created a world already that contains some of the issues that I commonly see whenever someone has a problem with the world. And to demonstrate that, let me see, I'm gonna try to navigate to that world. So this is the place. So I created this world called performance test. So I'm gonna visit that world in preview and let's see what happens. Hopefully the problems are there and we're gonna be able to see. So I'm gonna preview in the world. Let's see what happens when I enter. There you go. I joined the world. Everything is invisible, even though there aren't too many assets in the world. After a while, then everything renders, right? So that's the first symptom. Something is not right in here. So that's something that I've seen a lot on the Discord that happens a lot with a lot of creators. And we're gonna talk about some of the things that might be causing that type of a scenario. Another thing that I am also able to reproduce is traveling to the world and everything being completely dark. For that, I'm gonna have to stream from my headset. So for that, give me 1 second while I set that up. And I have my headset with me. I'm just gonna start the live stream here. Give me 1 second. I always like to keep these demonstrations live, just because sometimes there are issues that appear. I like to improvise a lot when I'm doing these workshops, just to keep things real, because these are the type of things that you normally see when you are working with your own worlds. And that's what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Okay, so I'm going to start streaming. So let's see what happens now when I travel to the world in VR. So I'm going to click here, my builds. And then I'm going to travel to the same world, but in VR now. So let me click on here. This is going to take that's the first symptom. It's taking like way too long, despite even though the world is pretty much empty. It's just a grid and a few assets in the world. That's the first indication that something is not right. There you go. It's completely dark. Can you see that? Let me
Yes.
look at the chat. Okay, awesome. So, well, not awesome because it's bad, but uh, but yeah. For example, like you can see, for example, everything is completely dark. Even though I only have probably like, I don't know, less than 15 assets in here, just a few tables, a few burgers over here, and a gun and a chair over here, but it was completely dark, and now I'm able to see, but that's part of the performance issue. So after I demonstrated those two issues that I commonly see, the world being completely invisible or the world being completely dark, let's see what's going on behind the scenes. So let me switch now to desktop editor. And now I'm going to travel to the world using the desktop editor. And let's see what we can discover over there. Okay, let me read through the comments as the Star is saying like word rendering has been taking a lot longer recently than usual, longer than usual. Anyone else experiencing this? Yes, I've myself have been experiencing that as well. But there are things that we're going to be covering today that might help, making that process more flawless, easier and less prone to errors. Um, yeah, we're going to be digging into performance issues today, just making sure that I'm not missing any important questions here. Thank you for letting me know about the streaming issues. Yeah, we were all crashing on headset today. Uh, the live demo syndrome. Yep, that was a thing. Okay, yep. And Angel, the artist, hey Angel, she's saying that she has never seen something like that. But yeah, many creators are experiencing that. So what do I have here? So in here, I have some of the common scenarios that I have observed in some of the performance uh, low performance worlds. We have a mirror over here. We have a few assets over here that looks like harmless. This one's over here. There's just like this one don't even have like textures. These are just burgers. We have kind of like a curtain here made out of text. This is just a bunch of, if I click on one of these ones, this is just a bunch of text gizmos with a number 8 on them. I myself used to create like things like this in the past, basically to create kind of like a chain effect or a curtain. I used to rely a lot on test gizmos, basically, just because of the transparencies that it has and all that. But we have that. We also have this chair over here that uh, looks like it has like a lot of detail. It's really nice to see in the desktop editor. But as you saw, when we visited the world in with the headset, it was completely dark. We also have this weapon here. There's one of the Meta Horizon assets that is also here as a demonstration, and we have a couple of custom UIs. So the first thing that you can notice here is that as I fly through the world, I'm just going to do it with a constant motion so you can see it. So let me position myself in a good spot. So I'm going to fly to the right for a minute. So I'm going to do this, and notice how when I pass through the mirror, like everything becomes super laggy. Like when I do this, I don't know if you can notice that on the stream. I don't know if you can see that like that on the stream, but as I fly through the world, there are certain spots where, everything becomes super laggy. Even I think with the weapon here, when I do this, I freeze for a second and then I start like moving normally. The same thing happens here with the burgers. Like when I do this, uh, sometimes as I zoom into the burgers back and forth, then I start like having like that laggy experience, basically indicating that something is not right. So that's kind of like the first symptom. When you yourself start experiencing like issues in edit mode, like something like not going quite right, that's a first indication that something must be addressed. Like, yes, I mean, I've been in the platform like for 4 years. I think that as many of you, and there are definitely some platform issues that affect, the world and our own creation process. But there are things that we own that we are able to modify to basically bypass those scenarios, because otherwise then we wouldn't be able to create any worlds. However, um, the way how I like to think about it is that I'm provided like with a budget of things that I can do, and my role as a creator is to make sure that everything that I create, everything that I want to create is under those limits. And then, eventually as Horizon, start adding more tools and budget to the world, then I can, start adding more things. All right. So now that we have identified, hey, something is not right here. I feel like super laggy when I go around the world. let's see what is the first thing that we can do to basically understand what's happening in the world. So the first tool that we have available is right here in the desktop editor. We can go here to the main menu and then click where it says world capacity. So in here is the, I want to call it like maybe like a simplified version or a easier to read version of the metrics that we have in headset. And basically in here we can see um, how much of that budget of objects we have used, how much simulation and animation we have used, how much in vertex count we have used as well, and sounds. The first thing to notice is that I have little, like literally like 0% of objects. I only have like 15 objects in the world, so that's why that percentage is super low. So I know that that is not my problem. Also, discarding again, just the obvious, I have 0 sounds. Actually, no, I have 1 sound that is on the gun, I think. When you shoot, it's just plays that sound. But since that is not significant, that's literally just 0%. Simulation and animation is within bounds. It says like 55%. However, I can see that there is kind of like a huge concentration here on text. Uh, Normally, you want to allocate your simulation animation for things that are going to be interactive. Like when you have like a high concentration on text, that's for me is unoptimized capacity that is being allocated to something that you could be using on something else. And what I mean by that is that 46% just to display a something like this could be done with a single texture that contains the same, image, right? Like right now, I have one test gizmo for each one of those chain or links of that chain. And that is literally probably, I don't know, probably like 300 test gizmos right now. And that's basically what's happening here that is driving that number being so high. So when you look at that, percentage number, and if you see like that high, then that is something that you probably could like look and then basically start addressing that and maybe replacing that with something else that could cost less. uh, Something to know is that technically we are not uh, constrained so much with these percentages. As you can see, for example, right now I am over the 100% limit on vertex count. What Horizon is asking us to do is that, hey, I'm giving you the tools to go ahead and measure your world performance, your world capacity guidelines. These are the recommended limits. You are free to go beyond those limits, but know that if your world is, performance under the is has a really low performance, these are the things that you probably had to address if you want to make it better in that sense, right? So if I'm noticing that in my world, the world is super laggy, these are things that I can start addressing. The other thing important here, the other thing that is important here, that is actually red, is what I just mentioned. Right now, for the number of vertices in the world, I am way beyond the recommended capacity. I am currently sitting at 195% in the world, even though the world is pretty much empty. Like when I look at the metrics again, I literally have 0% on objects. However, the number of vertices in the world is way beyond the recommended limits. That's another thing that you have to keep an eye on when you see like the correlation between objects and vertices in the world be so distant like this. That is another indication that something is not right. Again, this is just basically a quick way of evaluating how your world is sitting in terms of performance, but then we're going to transition to actually how to find specifically what in the world is driving those problems. We know, for example, that it potentially can be related with text, and we know, for example, that it could potentially also be related to how many vertices the objects that are currently sitting in the world um, uh, contain, right? So that's something that we're going to be looking into. So let's see, I saw something moving in the chat. So let's see if there is a question. So a question from Storming Decker, he's saying, I assume text is using TextMesh Pro under the hood. That's often a performance hog in Unity games. Right on the target right there. So yes, Horizon is currently is Unity based. So text is using TextMesh Pro. As as the comment says, that is constantly a performance issue in Unity. So whenever you, if you, I know that it can be very appealing to use test gizmos as a quick way of creating art or semi-transparent, assets, but know that there is a cost and performance implication of it. It's even worse if you attach a script to the test gizmo and you change the color or the content of the test gizmo on a loop or on an on-update loop. That is even worse because basically the rendering has to be recalculated on every frame. So that's another thing to keep an eye on if you're experiencing some of the issues that we demonstrated at the beginning of this session. All right, so there you go. So this is kind of like super laggy right there. Okay, so now that we saw that, let's see what we can start to do to identify what exactly in the world is causing those issues. So I'm gonna transition again to my headset, and I'm gonna show you what tools we have available in headset to measure these problems. So that is going to be here. Let me start the live stream again. All right, here we go. So oh, there you go. It's dark again. So I'm in edit mode. Um, okay, so now that we are here, the first tool that we can use is the real-time metrics. So there you go. Something to know about the real-time metrics is that the real-time metrics on its own also affects performance. As you can see, it's a live graph that shows you information about the world, and that on its own has its own cost. However, uh, it is a wrong assumption to blame the solution. And I don't know if I'm phrasing that correctly, but the world needs to be in a state that it allows, using this type of tools without problems. If your world crashes just because you're opening the performance tool, the performance tool is not the problem. The problem is the current state of the world. So that's something to keep in mind. So the first thing that I recommend to do whenever you're using performance tools is that try not to just stay in one place and then evaluate the overall performance of your world based on that. Like as I'm standing right now, the performance right now is saying that it's like 66, 69, which is okay. Like when you see something like over 65, 70, then your world is fine. So if I were to say, for example, if I stand right here and then I look at the metrics, then I'm gonna evaluate and determine, oh, my world is doing great on FPS, right? Like for example, like, yeah, like I can get up to 66, 60, 68, 70 right there. There's no problem. However, the real way of evaluating performance metrics is literally just by playing the world, experiencing the world the same way how a visitor would. Even better, if you are able to invite play testers into your world and measure the performance while you have the full capacity of players in the world. That is going to give you the true measurement of what the problems are. So for now, I'm on my own here. So all I'm gonna do is just gonna go around the world and basically, experience the world as I would. Something that I'm noticing here is that for example, like when I go in front of the mirror, I do experience some performance drops. Like for example, I can see like 58, 55, and yeah, as I go, you can see there is a immediate low drop of performance 44 now, and that's not yet, right? Um, Sometimes it is hard to decide when it's okay to keep a feature in the world or when we should like remove it just to make sure that the session stays stable, stays consistent during the duration of the visit of the player. Um, as a personal experience, I worked on a project where the mirror was one of the things that we wanted to implement when the mirror first, was released for for the public. We wanted to implement the mirror as part of their experience. However, at the end, we decided to remove it in pro of keeping the performance of the world under the recommended levels. I know that sometimes that can be a hard decision to make, but you have to kind of like balance, right? What the features you want to offer to your visitors versus what the performance that you want to keep in the world. So that's one thing to consider. Um, the immediate recommendation will not be to remove the feature, but to evaluate what else you have in the world and see if by removing or solving some of the other problems, you can then decide to keep the mirror. But that's one thing to keep in mind. So that's one thing. For example, when moving around the world, also you can notice there that even though, everything is rendering for me okay, in the mirror itself, everything is still dark, right? And the reason for that is actually the performance of the other assets that I have in the world. And we are going to cover that next. So the other problem that we have here are the burgers. As you can see here, as I pass through the burgers like that, oh, look at 25 here. As I go through the burgers here, you can see how the number drops. And again, your visitors, right? We have many kids sometimes that visit the roles and they never stay still in one place, right? Normally what they do is that they do something like this. And this is precisely what you need to do when you're measuring performance in your world. And as I do that, oh, 14 over there, I'm about to crash almost. But as I go around the burgers, and you can see here, it's only 3 burgers, right? It looks like something like super harmless. But as I go through it, I can see that there is a high drop on performance here. I saw 14 earlier, 27 now. I'm actually starting to feel a little bit of nausea right now just by doing that. Because I don't know if you can see it in the live stream, but it's super laggy for me when I do that. So I know for sure that that is a problem. There is a problem right now with those burgers. I'm gonna go back to that in a second. But yeah, that's a problem. But actually, when looking at the metrics, in fact, let's point that out. So when we look at the metrics here, we have different categories here, right? So when I pass through the burgers, you see here that the number that increases in that one is going to be physics. Like right now, I'm okay. I'm 67, 72. The physics is under control. However, when I go through here, then the physics metrics goes all the way up, and then the FPS drops. Pay attention to that part, the physics and the FPS. You'll notice that as the physics increases, then the FPS drops. Physics increases, FPS drops. So that's another thing. And again, I cannot emphasize that enough. When measuring performance, make sure to move around because when I stay still, the metrics go all the way to 74. But then when I go just by passing by a single asset, then the FPS drops significantly. So that's another thing to keep in mind. We know that there is a problem with the burgers. And actually, I guess that we can demonstrate how to fix that real quickly. If I go into edit mode, and then I go to the burgers, since I know that these are collidable, I'm gonna select them all. I'm gonna open the properties of them, and I'm gonna make it non-collidable. I think that should solve some of the physics issues. And there you have it. Now, when I pass through it, look at that. Immediate solution right there, just by removing the collision of the burgers. The burgers, just because, spoiler alert, they're still expensive, but just by removing the physics, the collision of the burgers, look at that. No more 14 FPS numbers. It stays within, reasonable limits. So that's something to keep in mind there. Another thing as well, sometimes when I go through the text, this is kind of like a little bit difficult to reproduce. And just because once you render something in your headset, the texture is pretty much downloaded. So I already have that in my headset. So that's why I don't see the spike. But this is part of the problem that when I travel to the world, that information is being downloaded to my headset. And that's what causes those dark spot or completely invisible things is because my headset is still downloading all that data and causes those travel issues. So this is going to be hard for me to kind of like to reproduce right now, but know that that's another thing that you could potentially measure. And we're going to use Perfetto later to actually see some of those problems. This one here, this only one, this isn't thing. This one has a high texture. That's basically what I want to demonstrate with this one. But I'm going to use a different tool to demonstrate what's happening with this share and why this one looks so dark in when we visit the world. And this one is going to be the weapon. I don't know if you noticed there that when I grab the weapon, the FPS dropped to 45 at some point. I don't know if I'm going to be able to repro it because the gun now is being owned by me. Let me see if I reset the world, if I'm able to do that. Stop and play. Oh, actually, I have to stop, reset, and play. And then let me see if I can repro it. So that's the gun right there. So if I grab it, I'm not able to repro it now, but I don't know if you noticed earlier, it dropped to 45 when I first grabbed it. So what's happening with this weapon is that when the player enters the world is spawning some assets. And what I want to demonstrate there is that when the ownership transfers of those assets, also FPS is affected. I'm going to be able to demonstrate that better with Perfetto later when I do that. Okay, so that's the metrics for performance metrics in headset. There are other metrics here that you can activate or deactivate depending on what you're measuring. You can measure scripting, audio, avatars, vertices, GPU, all the way to bindings and memory. The best way of using these tools is doing exactly an exercise similar to this one. Whenever you have a problem in your world, what I normally do is that I create a clone of the world, and then I start isolating those assets, and then I look at tools like this one to understand what are the problems that are causing those issues in my world. Okay, that's it for performance metrics. Let me see if there are questions. I'm gonna look at the chat. Will changing the mirror settings help performance? That's a really good question. Um, that's something that I will definitely experiment with to see if there is a change in performance. Also, the placement of it, I do know affect the performance when using the mirror. Like you don't want to put a mirror, let's say, facing the spawn point location, because that means that as soon as the player enters the world, their information is going to be rendering the mirror as well. So whenever you have a mirror, you want to put it in a place that you know will not be accessible by the player directly, and you want to put it like that they have to go there intentionally if they want to see something in it. Yeah, yeah, those are bad burgers. Remember the movie? Uh, like we'll change a mirror update to 5 PS fix it. Uh, uh, Definitely. I mean, with everything affected, definitely yes. With anything affecting performance, everything comes down to experimentation. Uh, Many of the rules that we're going to be discussing today will be applicable to certain worlds, but then you're going to find that probably those rules do not apply to yours. There's always a balance of what interactions you have in the world versus what performance issues you have. Like, for example, like having something like a lot of like collisions, for example, uh, will be acceptable on a parkour game. For example, in a parkour game where you have like a lot of obstacles, and then when the player collides with something, then the player probably, get bounced back or something. In a world like that, it's okay to have high colliders. But then if you have high colliders, you know that you probably have to allocate that performance or reduce that budget from another bucket. Like for example, like rendering or removing meshes or removing textures, something like that. So it's always like a balance. So for example, in the case with mirror, that's what I mentioned earlier. Like if you do really want to keep the mirror in your world, just make sure to keep it, but then go around the world and then see what other things you can free up from the world to make sure that you can allocate performance budget for that feature. Um, Melanie here is asking, I'm sorry if this is a bit off topics, but is there a way to remove the black motion sickness circles when in edit mode? I know how to get them to go away in regular player. Yes, you can definitely remove the that feature. All you have to do is literally just go in build mode and then go to settings and then comfort, and then you can remove the options here. You can basically make it none, and that's how you can remove it. Let's see. On the build menu, there is, oh yeah, there you go. Thank you, Yelitza. Thank you, Orally Order, for replying to that. Stormy is asking, were the burgers using really high density geometry and using the dense visual mesh as a collision mesh? Yep, that was the problem on that one. We're gonna take a look on that one in a second. Melanie's asking, does this mean when anyone passes in front of the mirror, it slows the game for everyone or just the player in the vicinity of the mirror? Great question. So there is a distinction between performance on the server side and performance on the client side. Performance on the server side are things that affect everybody in the world. And that is basically things that are shared. Like, for example, like collisions are shared, right? That's something that affects everybody in the world. Things like rendering the burgers, that's something that, affects everybody in the world. So that's kind of like on the server side. However, things like the mirror, this is something that you are going to be able to see the performance drop on the client side. But, since I'm the one taking the performance metrics right now, I'm the one who's, capturing those performance drops whenever I pass by the mirror. Uh, so yeah, for things that are like player specific, those affects the player. Things like things that the player owns, things that when using local scripts like the gun over here. This is something that we're gonna look at it in a few minutes. That affects the player, not the server, because I'm the one who's owning the script or the object in that case. Um, Is there a way to reduce vertices on publicly available tri-mesh assets without using Blender? No, you have to use external tools for that. You have to download the geometry, decimate it, optimize them, and then re-upload them. But yeah, we cannot do that directly on the desktop editor. Okay, great. So let's dive into the other topic here, which is basically using the other performance tool that we have available, which is tracing. So if I click on tracing, you're gonna see a few options here. Overview, I will omit that one here. Overview is a simplified version of the deep trace that we're gonna be looking at. But the two that I normally use are deep and world content. Let's look at world content first. So what I'm going to do with this one, again, as always, anything related to performance, I like to start from the spawn point location, and then I go around the world, and then I stop the trace. So this is where I normally spawn. I'm going to click on world content, and then I'm going to start tracing. So I started the trace. I'm just going around the world, and then, just looking at things. Then the curtains, look at that, jump, and the gun, and then the custom UI is over there, and the share. And that's it for work content. I'm going to stop the trace right there. The next one that I'm going to capture is the deep trace, but for that, I'm going to return the collision on this because I want to be able to capture those things. Let me make sure that the collision is back on. Yeah, they're all collidable. Okay, cool. And then now I'm going to do the deep trace, which is this one. So I captured the world content. That was the first one. I'm going to do the deep one. So I'm going to start the trace. Then I'm going to do the same thing, just jump around in front of the mirror. Then I look at the burgers, feeling a little bit laggy already there. Then the text. Then the weapon. I'll go back to the weapon in a second because that's something special. And then the chair and the custom UI here with, transferring ownership and setting visibility. And that's it for that one. And then something else that I want to do before I go back to desktop editor, let me restart the world, is that I also want to capture a trace just by using the weapon alone. So I'm gonna wait until the mark says here, the time here is 43, the 43 minutes, just because the time is how you can tell what trace it is. So I captured the deep trace at the mark of 41, 42. So I'm gonna wait until it's 8:43 to capture the trace for the gun over here. So let's see. Everything, all that is gonna make sense in a second, I promise. So I'm just gonna wait until it's 8:43 here. And let's see, should be almost there. Okay, cool. It's now 8:43. So I'm gonna start a deep trace just by interacting with the gun here. So I'm gonna press start trace. Then I'm gonna, just use it, grab, release a lot of times. So grab, release, just like that. Fun fact, you can crash a world just by doing this. Grab and releasing something. So that's what I'm doing right now. Okay, so that's it. And then I'm gonna stop the trace. Okay, cool. So that's it for capturing everything, all the performance traces. You can do the same thing using the browser by if you travel to your world and then you press P on the keyboard, if you're using the desktop, you're gonna be able to capture the same things. I do prefer to use the headset. I find it more accurate in my experience. But you can capture the same trace using uh, 2D tools as well. All right, so I think that's it for the headset. Let's switch back to PC. Give me 1 second to turn this off. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, so after you capture a trace, the place, let me go back to the world in desktop editor first. And then after you capture a trace, uh, you can find the result of those traces under the performance bucket here. So if I go to performance, as you can see here, you can find all the traces. And this is what I mentioned about the time, is that it's easier to find your traces if you take note of the time that you took the trace, because the name is not very descriptive. So I know that the gun trace, I captured that during at 8:43. That's how I know that was it. Then the world content is down here at 8:41, and then everything else was the deep trace. So let's start with the world content trace that we captured. So for the world content, you have to download it. So I'm gonna download that. So I'm gonna click on Open Trace, Download. And then when I go to the desktop editor, I can switch to the, oh my gosh, super laggy. 1 second, let me move to a better place. Okay, I can go now to the Performance tab here, click on Open Trace, and then I'll open the trace that I just downloaded, which is this one. Double click on it, and it will show me the information about this role here. So there you go. So the information that you can see here, you can see the density of your meshes. You can see how many vertices you have on those meshes, how many triangles, and how much that represents in terms of memory. It also tells you, like, how many objects are using uh, um, that mesh in particular. So out of the bat, I can see that there is one instance of a high poly mesh, but the one that I want to actually focus my attention to are the spikes. Whenever you capture a trace like this, always pay attention to the high levels. In this case, where the GPU went all the way up here. So when I click on that part of the trace, I'll notice that, then I'm gonna be able to see everything that I was observing at that particular frame. And just because I did this earlier, I know that these are the burgers. And you can see that here, because we have basically the same mesh ID repeated 3 times. And as you can see here in the trace, a single burger, one of these, has 280, 700 thousand vertices right now. And each one of those burgers costs 35 megabytes. So as you can see, something like might at first look so harmless, like this. This is a common asset that you can download from any like portal, with free assets. You put it in your world because it looks good, but then it has a high cost and performance. This out of the bat, I know, is the reason why this alone is the single reason why traveling to the world sometimes everything looks super dark or looks completely invisible. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to repro it now because I already downloaded this information into my memory pretty much, like in the desktop editor. But I think if I try to drag and drop that asset again into a world, I should be able to observe some of those problems. So when I do this, like if I try to bring a burger again, there you go. It's kind of like I cannot even see it, kind of like disappear. And that's how you can tell that you have a problem in your world. There you go. And now it renders. But then if I make it smaller, see how everything is like super dark? And then after a while, it starts like, rendering correctly. Like if I wait long enough, then the light is going to be rendered correctly. And then everything is going to look okay in edit mode. But as you saw, that's the reason why we observe those problems. Just as a single asset could damage the entire performance of your world. This is what causes the dark spots and also the everything being invisible when you go to the world. So that's something to keep an eye on, and that's the reason why this trace is important because it allows you to see those high cost elements in the world. The other thing that I want to kind of like to point out how this is useful is that you can click on this drop down here, and then you can basically um, do the same analysis for textures, audio, light, and colliders. I know I don't have any audios, like significant audio here. I don't have any lights, but if I switch to textures, um, and again, nothing related to performance is static. If I were to do this right now, I'm gonna observe that, oh, I'm okay. I only have one texture that is only like 611. However, again, the best approach is to always like scrub through, basically just click around and observe whenever you have like a spike or whenever you have some outliers that that could represent a potential danger to the performance of your world. And in this particular case, I noticed here that the share has a cost of 9 megabytes, and it's because the texture is 4K. Um, I think that we can all agree that this share doesn't need a 4K texture. I have that texture just because that's the texture that came with the asset, but by all means, this can be rendered with a lower texture. And speaking of how to address those two issues, like a high poly or a high texture uh, asset, um, there are things that you can do. For example, and we have a space glitter here in the chat. I know that she has some performance topics related this month that she's going to be talking about. So definitely attend to those sessions. But for things like meshes, you can definitely just use like things like decimating the mesh, just to delete all the parts of the mesh that are currently not being used. Like if I zoom in inside the mesh, as you can see, the lettuce and everything has a bunch of vertices. So if I will never go inside the burgers like this, I could definitely just go inside the burger and remove all that mesh that is not actually relevant for me in this experience, right? I can remove all those vertices, all that mesh inside of it, and that's gonna make that asset more, lightweight and easier to render in the world. If you like the design, by all means, you can keep it, but just make sure that you do the due diligence of optimizing it to make sure that it doesn't affect your world. For the uh, topic of textures, this is even easier to address. Like right now, this texture is 4K. If you want to fix that problem, um, it's actually super easy. Even if you're using Windows, let me find that asset real quick. That's gonna be performance, and then, okay. This is the texture that I'm using with that chair, is 4K. Um, if I right click on that texture and then I click on properties and then details, I can see here that this texture is 4K. You can change the resolution of the texture without any software if you're using Windows. I'm sure that you can do the same thing on Mac. But if I right click on the texture itself, uh, there is an option here that is called Resize. And then in here, I can just go ahead and affect and change the resolution of that texture. Like I'm gonna just duplicate it, copy paste, and I'm gonna right click on it. I'm gonna click on resize the image, and then I'm gonna make it maybe like 1K, so 124, I think it is. And then by 124, 1024, there you go. And then I'm gonna resize it. It's gonna do it. And now when I right click on it, and then I click on properties, then I go to details, there you go, it's only 1K. And now we went down to 1 MB instead of like the 9 MB that that texture used to weight. So just doing something as simple as that, you can minimize the cost of a texture. That's the easiest thing that you can do. But again, I encourage you to attend to one of the Space Glitter and Mike the Guru workshops where they're going to be talking about optimizing and creating better worlds, for that to address these issues. Some of those things are, like texture maps, atlasing, um, UV unwrapping, and all of that. But definitely, there are things that you can do even with free assets like this one. Okay, so the last thing that I want to do, that's the thing about world content that you can look at and basically look at those issues and basically understand what's going on. The last thing or the last tool that we have available is the Perfetto traces. So if I go back here to my trace, I'm going to jump ahead and open the trace that I captured for when I was playing with the gun. So that's the one that I captured at 8:43. So going back to that question about like if the mirror is affecting the player or if it's affecting the server, this is another way how you can detect what is affecting what. Whenever you capture a performance trace with Perfetto, you get two type of traces. You get the trace for server and you get the trace for client. The server one is going to give you all the different things that are affecting everybody in the world. The trace for client is going to give you everything that is affecting the player that is capturing the trace. And let's see how that looks. So I'm gonna open this one here. This one is on the client side. So I'm gonna click on this one and then Perfetto. This is gonna open the trace on an external website. I will not spend too much time on this because I have another workshop towards the end of this month that is just about Perfetto. We're gonna have a lot of fun with Perfetto there. There's a lot to talk about Perfetto. And as you can see, it can look a little bit overwhelming to look at this data. Sometimes this kind of like a game of find the differences, pretty much, where you have to develop that eye that allows you to identify what are the outliers in this trace. But high level overview, um, what we can see here is every frame that was captured during a trace, literally every frame. You know that normally a frame, if the world is performance, 1 second has 70 frames. So if I capture, like if I capture, 10 seconds of traces, that's literally, 700 frames that I'm capturing here with the trace. And that's why this looks so busy. As a general rule, when using Perfetto, you don't want to capture like extended sessions of it. Um, you want to capture, one interaction at a time, like what I did with the gun. I just focused on the gun, then I started like grabbing, releasing a bunch of times and capture that for a few seconds, and that's my trace. And then I'm gonna concentrate of identifying what is the problems with the gun. And some of the things that you can observe, and again, just develop that eye, is that we have some busier areas in certain spots. And just because I've done this a bunch of times, those are the times when I grab, release the weapon. And what's happening during those times is that since the gun is local, uh, the the script is initialized and destroyed every time that I grab and release the gun. So when I grab the gun, the ownership is transferred to me. and then when I let go of the gun, then the ownership is transferred back to the server. I think this is going to be easier to see if I switch to the server side trace, which is this one. Again, sorry that I know that I'm going a little bit fast on Perfetto. I'm going to have a just Perfetto session towards the end of this month, so I highly recommend you to go there to attend to that session. So if I switch um, to the to the server side trace of that gun, you can see here that I can get that trace, basically receiving the ownership of that gun whenever I release the weapon. So I grab it, then the player, the client, receive the ownership, and then when I let go of the gun, then the server receives the ownership. And as you can see, this action alone consumes a big chunk of the allocated time of that frame. And even though it doesn't look significant, it is significant when you compare that action versus a frame where that is not happening. So for example, in this case, the transferring ownership is using 527 nanoseconds, whereas that's something that you can free up, to use for other dynamics in the world if you didn't have to do that so frequently. So there are techniques and tricks that you can use there to basically minimize the number of times that you have to transfer the ownership of something to a player to minimize the impact or cost on the player or the server. If you keep zooming into these traces, you're gonna see things even like when subscribing to an event. In this case, what's happening here is that for every event, every event subscription, meaning like, for example, like when you use Connect Coblock event, Connect local broadcast event and stuff like that, each one of those things have a cost, and you can see that here with Perfetto. This is the only way how you can see those things. So that's the importance of using Perfetto to better understand how each one of those scripting decisions, even building decisions that we make in the world can affect the performance and duration of your frame. In this world in particular, it looks like the average duration of the frame was 16 milliseconds. The recommended level or recommended duration should be like 13 milliseconds if you want to keep it within the 70 frames per second. Okay, again, I'm going to be talking a lot about Perfetto by the end of this month, and we're going to see how to summarize this data, how to better understand this information, and how to address the issues that are being covered here. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the questions. Let's see. Let me go back up. Okay, so we have uh, is there an easy way to detect objects that have collision turn on? Yes, great question. So yes, there is an easy way, sort of. Basically, with the desktop editor as well as in headset, you can change the rendering mode up here. So it's this button. Um, you can change it to be collision, and then it'll show you all different things that have colliders in the world. So, oh yeah, super, okay. So as you can see here, these burgers have collision and that's why they're orange. But then if I select one of them and then I switch the collision off, they're not orange anymore, meaning that they don't have colliders. So the collider is gonna be visible in headset in particular if you're close to the object. In desktop editor is better, I think. But if you are using the headset for this, know that something from the distance might look like it doesn't have a collider, but if you get closer to it, it's going to turn orange, meaning that it does have a collider. So just keep that in mind. Oh, there you go. And thank you, Dominic. He says that the shortcut for that is pressing 5, the number 5 key on your keyboard. Um, yeah, it is an expensive burger, but it's tasty. I agree. Yeah, it is. It looks really good, but is the cost of having a performance world versus something that has a good look, I guess. Um, So Stormy is saying, oh, so the dark spots are global illumination trying to recompute the vertex lighting across the world. And with only a small per frame time budget taking a long time, that's really good to know. That explains some of the stuff I've seen. Yes, exactly. So as I said, everything in the world is kind of like a budget that you have to like to learn how to manage that budget and how the player is going to be able to render everything in the world. Stormin Decker explained it perfectly. It's literally just the vertex lighting trying to recalculate how those assets are being rendered in the world, and the higher the cost of those assets, then the longer it's going to take the light to render in the world, if ever. Some headset, especially if you're using the Quest 2, what's going to happen is just going to crash and you won't be able to render anything ever. Um, so I actually had no idea that texture will slow things down. I thought it was all vertices. Yeah, definitely textures affect rendering a lot. The best way I can describe it is like, everything is pretty much a stream, right? Everything is being downloaded as you interact with the game. So the higher the cost, the higher the rendering of the texture, then the player has to download all that information real time. So the more megabytes you have that they have to download, then the slower the interaction is going to be for them, especially if the player has a really low network, speed. So that's another thing to take in consideration. Normally, when we are creating these worlds, we have optimal conditions for internet connection. However, as you know, we get visitors from anywhere in the world, and sometimes some visitors are on mobile devices that might not have a good internet speed, and that also causes that for them the object might not render, and then you're going to have players that can see an object and then others that cannot, and that is the problem. Normally you want to make it as easier as possible for your visitors to render the things in the world. um, Angel, the artist, she's being transparent here. She's saying that 90% of her textures are 4K. So now I got some changes to do. There you go. You have some homework now. But this is a fun thing. At least for me, I find this process really super fun because normally what I like to do in my worlds is that I capture a trace. I capture, let's say, like how my frame rate is. Then I write that down somewhere, and then I go around and then start like changing things, making optimal, optimizing things, and then I compare that number. It's kind of like a fun game. It's kind of like find the bug kind of thing. I don't know. I know it's strange, but yeah, it's kind of like a fun game, at least for me. Um, yeah, and as Audley saying, you are so smart to find tools that will improve the performance of your world. Um, yeah, Dominic is saying that recommendation is to have roughly 2 4K texture maximum per world. And actually, you can use the 4K texture if you're packing your textures into one. And again, that's something that Space Glitter and Mike the Guru can talk better than me on that. And that is basically just use one 4K texture, for example, to put all the texture that you're going to be, using in the world. Although there are pitfalls around that as well, but definitely just make sure that not everything in the world has a 4K, that you manage the budget of 4K textures. Does a burger visible size impact the performance? Small burgers versus large burger, same number of vertices. Great question. It affects lighting more than vertices. The number of vertices number changes, but I don't know if you noticed there when the burger was larger and then I made it smaller, then the light around it, I don't know if I'm going to be able to repro it now. Let me disable the collision, shade it. I think I'm gonna have to bring a new one. I think if I bring a new one, you're gonna be able to see. But basically, what affects the most is lighting, and therefore affecting performance, right, and rendering in the world. So uh, here you go. So it's kind of like it's slowly rendering. It's gonna appear eventually, and then it's not on the table, so it probably will not affect lighting. But yeah, know that it does affect lighting, therefore performance, and therefore, FPS. But it doesn't, the number of vertices never changes. Um, does having fewer 4K textures instead of many 1K textures improve performance? Great question. So the reason why you might decide to have a bunch of 1K textures versus 1K textures is cooling. And what that means is that you want to concentrate your assets in a way that when the player is looking at one object, it's not rendering the things that is behind it. So for example, like if I include in the same texture this chair and the burgers, by looking at this chair, then I'm gonna be, also rendering the burgers behind it. So you want to isolate those things. You want to, for example, like keep everything like packed together in a scene. I want to call it that way. So that way you don't force the rendering of things that are not within view. So that's a one reason why you might want to um, split those textures instead of having one big one. Um, Angel the artist here is asking, what's the optimal size for the rest of the assets, or does it really depend of the asset? I just hate low quality looking textures, but I also want my world optimized. That comes down to experimentation, honestly. Like, I have some names in my mind, but I don't want to mention any names right now. I don't want to mention any world names, but um, you can have a really stylized world, right, with a lot of high definition textures, but then you're gonna have to use other techniques to make sure that the player doesn't download all that information at once. For example, what you could do there is you can have, let's say, like different rooms or different areas, and then you pack or group all the details of that area or those areas into one group, right? In a way that when the player looks in one direction, it doesn't have to download the information that is behind them. If you group everything together into one single asset, uh, then cooling will not help you. Basically, the player is going to be downloading the entire world regardless of where they're looking at. So if you really want to go again with the high definition, high texture, uh, try experiment a little bit, lowering the resolution of it until you find a point where you feel happy about how it looks, and then just go from there and then start adjusting the budget. Another thing that you can do, and again, it's just sorry, Space Glitter, I probably I'm wearing your name, is you can do baking your textures. There is a technique called baking that you can basically simulate those high details, high level details into a texture in a way that you don't have to use meshes or vertices to create those effects. Like for example, if I go back to the burger, if I go, let's say, to what the creator of this asset did, is that he or she created this lettuce, right? And every single detail here is made out of vertices. So instead of doing that, what you can do is just replace this with a plane, literally, or something that has less polys or less vertices, and just use a texture to simulate that, all the wavy, all the waves and all that of the letters. So there are techniques and tricks that you can do to still keep that high definition or high quality of the mesh or the asset without sacrificing performance. Um, Okay, and also Scott here is saying, um, in terms of performance, when adding assets, what is the difference between having 10 identical assets versus 10 different assets, all size being the same? I am trying to understand when to reuse an asset versus creating a new one. Great question. Um, so definitely having different instances of the same asset is better for performance than having different ones, because when you reuse the same asset, you basically you don't have to re-download the textures anymore. Once the texture is downloaded into the headset or the player device, they don't have to re-download it again if they're looking at the same assets, in multiple instances. But if you have multiple assets that are using different textures, each texture is a new asset per se, and a new download, a new piece of information that the player has to download. So that's another thing to keep in consideration. Great question. Storming Decker is replying to Angel. I remember that textures don't need to be much larger than the space they are going to take on the screen during play. On a 1280 by 1080 screen, even covering half the screen, 512 by 512 should look fine. Yeah, that's a great point there. I get that question a lot, like what is the recommended size for mobile devices? Literally remember that the player that is visiting your world on a mobile device has a really tiny screen on their phone. So a really tiny texture will do wonders in terms of performance, and it still is going to look good from the visitor's point of view. Um, oh yeah, oh, thank you so much, Yelitza, for dropping the link. I'll reshare it again. Please, everybody, if you like this session, if you didn't like it as well, make sure to fill the survey. That helps the team understand if this type of content is useful or not. And also, we can change the format of these workshops and office hours to better fit your needs. So please take a few minutes there to complete the survey and provide feedback for the team. Uh, Dominic here is saying, my rule of thumb is if the texture is larger than the player, you can use a 1K or up. If it's smaller than the player, then you can then go lower than 1K. Great rule. I didn't know that one, so thank you for sharing that. Dominic, by the way, is a great builder. If you know him, make sure to network with him because he knows a lot about building Horizon worlds as well. Um, so yeah, I think that covers everything. We are 14 minutes after the hour. So I think we answered a lot of questions, a lot of great content, I think. I hope that these tools help you understand your performance better. And oh, there you go. The burger is making that area dark already. I don't know why, but those burgers, I think I'm gonna be dreaming with burgers tonight. But but yeah, make sure to use those tools to evaluate your world and to see if there is something that you can change to increase performance and increase the frames per second rate. All right, that's all for me. Thank you so much for attending this session. And I look forward to seeing you later this month with the Perfetto Trace workshop.